So our next speaker is Dr. Bob Sinibaldi. He, if you're new, you'll see his face here quite a bit through the year. He does a lot for TBFC. He's a past president. He is a current director. If we have an auction, you'll see him hawking our wares. He has been at it here with the club about 25 years, I would guess. And he is not a paleontologist for you new folks. We do call him Dr. Bob, but he is not a PhD in science. He is a PhD in the special needs education. He teaches and coaches children who are ill, injured, and in some cases nearly dead. He does God's work with these kids, and he's been on TV before that. He's much more successful probably in that field than he was in this one. He would write in journals and travel all over the country. He was a national teacher of the year in his field, and but we appreciate his fossil stuff. I'll let you tell him about your books and such, but come on up, Dr. Bob.
So like Mike said, my doctorate is not in archaeology or paleontology, but I've done a ton of reading on it. I'm somewhere pushing towards book review 500, so I don't know, 440 or 50 of them, I don't know how I've done. But anyway, so I've done a lot of reading on it. And this is a hobby, or as my wife said by the time we've written 4 books on it, it's an obsession, and a lot of us can do it. Well, so this presentation came out of not my last book, but the book before that, What Your Fossils Can Tell You, which when I went to look to see some to bring them in, I have actually sold out of them, and it's been re-released as a paperback by University of Florida. But when I went to put that book together, in the final chapter was on what a lot of the paleo Indians had done with bones, antler teeth, and stuff, and it kind of spilled into the archaeological stuff. And I took pictures of stuff from Paul Lynn and some other people in the club that had found bone fish hooks and that kind of thing. We'll talk a little bit about that. And by pure chance, someone gave me Hillary Stewart's book, and it is on the Pacific Northwest. It's a proto-historic, kind of historic period in the 17 and 1800s. Those cultures did not get affected by disease as quickly as Florida and when the Spanish first came in. So they were still living as was 700, 900, or 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. And we're going to talk about it. So I started noticing some similarities, and at the same time I read the Hillary Stewart book, I ran into the book by Frank Hamilton Cushing, who is the Key Marco site. And I started noticing all these similarities, and I had to compare them to the Walmart fishermen, because the local fisher people think that everything is brand new and they're all that in a bag of chips. And it turns out a lot of this stuff was around a lot longer. So that's what the presentation is going to be about. And so we'll look at, the native cultures in Florida. The Gulf Coast is obviously our side, and people that dove long before like I said, like Paul and Jim Tatum and those guys, they were finding fish hooks, and Paul was kind enough to bring some bone pins and fish hooks and some stuff that he had found probably over the last 40 or 50 years. And anyway, so we're going to look at that. The Pacific Northwest kind of goes from the west coast of Alaska right down through Canada, through the top up here by Washington and Oregon, so all up in there. And because that culture held on so much longer, stuff was found, and there was actually anthropologists and those kind of people that were actually collecting stuff from those Native American cultures. And when Cushing found the Key Marco site, a lot of that stuff got preserved in muck, and the similarities you'll see when we start putting them up are incredible between those two cultures. And the Walmart fisherman can speak for himself. So there he is. Looks a little bit like Fred Hendershot coming out of there, but not sure. So today's fish hook, truly a modern marvel, or are they? It's got an eye on it, which is probably the only thing that the archaic ones and the early ones don't have. You got a shank, you got the curve, you got a point, you got a barb here, and yet when we look at the early fish hooks, now Ted and Nita were members of our club. They used to be on our board going way back, probably 20 years ago now. they found these are really small fish hooks on the Santa Fe River on the same day. That's just like beyond a miracle. You know, the fish hooks are really, really rare and hard to come by. Every so often you'll see somebody at some show and they'll have a case. And Paul's probably got 10 or 15. No, a case with like 40 fish hooks. You're like, you know, how did this happen? But whatever. And we'll talk a little bit about how that can happen, because sometimes they were diving or they were digging near a fish campsite, an early one. So more of the fish hooks will look more like this. They have a pretty long shank. Instead of an eye hole where you would put the cord through, they have a knob on them where they would have tied it around. And then some type of sinew or whatever with cordage made out of, you know, fibers or whatever, and then they would have used some kind of resin to glue it on there. And that's a Paul Lynn hook, probably one of the ones that's in this case somewhere. And this was I think this was another Paul Lynn hook. It might have been a Tatum one, but this might be one of Paul's also. Anyway, very pointy. Again, you can see the knob. If you look at it from here to there, it's about 1.5 inches, maybe 1.25 inches long. And the workmanship to get those points, it's really, they spend a lot of time and effort to do these. I mean, it's not something, you know, that just happened overnight. But again, the people that made them were probably skilled, and it might take us, if we were trying to carve one out of bone, it would take us 10 times as long as it would take the people that were used to doing this and their life depended on it. So this case is actually up here, except the thing that says ST207, that's a 207th artifact I had found out of the Steenhatchee. That's actually like a piece of turtle shell that they've carved perfectly round for, Paul thought maybe a gaming piece. Hard to say what they were thinking of using it for. And the other side, I don't know how it ended up in a case like that, probably because I want to show the label, but the other side you can see the soft shell turtle pattern on it, so maybe they were throwing it and you had literally like a heads and tails type of thing that they would have. And so these are 5 fish hooks that I found on the Steenhatchee, and I have 3 or 4 broken ones also. I found a really, it's in here, partial fish hook that's a killer pointy one like this, and it's snapped off, and the gaming piece not in there, but that case is up there with those fish hooks. And a lot of work goes into these, and they are rare finds. And in fact, the very first one I found was this one here, way back in the day, and the visibility was just, it always is terrible in Steenhatchee, very, very low visibility. And I literally had no idea what I found. I thought I found like a little rib bone. And I put it in my little bag, and then when I got up on the dock, I'm like, oh my God, this is a fish hook. So my mind, I had been diving probably for 20 some odd years by that time, and my mind wasn't even thinking fish hook because I'd never found one. You found a little curved bone, oh, that's a little rib of some kind. Anyway, so this is either one of Paul's or Jim's. In the book they're labeled like who found what, either Jim Tatum or Paul Lynn's, but this is a really big honky one. So I don't see it in. Oh, maybe it is. Maybe it's this great big one here at the end. So some of them got quite big. You know, I mean, they're like you'll see how big the ones are in my case. They're all like 2 1/4, 2 1/2. This one I want to say is like a 3 1/2. So, you know, other than terminating a knob, they're very similar to today's fish hooks. Of course, more common find, broken ends, and I want to say these might have been either Paul's or Jim Tatum. You can see here's the shank with the knob, here's the base part, and there's the point. And if you were to put all 3 of those together, they're obviously not from the same fish hook, but it's very common to find those little partial ones. And you'll see, I guess Paul's probably got some partial ones in here, and I have one partial one in mine. So, compound fish hooks, so bone pins, and Paul's got a bunch of bone pins in here, and they might have actually had a very small pointy one, and I stuck these there, and probably should have been closer to the end, and they would have used that as either a spear or as a tie some food around it, it would swallow, and then when they pulled it back on the string, so they would have a string on this end, glued, or you know, with some pitch or whatever, some kind of tar type stuff to hold them on there. So compound hooks, this is a hook that's made from a raccoon baculum and a deer antler tine. So the deer antler tine is like this. You'll know it because it's drilled through here, and the baculum is a raccoon penis bone is what it is. And they made a compound hooks out of those. Now, there's sites, I have on the Steenhatchee, I had a site where I found 3 raccoon vacuums, because the Native Americans probably more typically made this part out of a piece of wood, which would long be gone. Because you're thinking, how can I find 3 raccoon penis bones and there's no other part of a raccoon there? That's just how bizarre, because they're really delicate. And I have another vacuum from Rainbow River that was just a raccoon vacuum sitting in there. You're like, how does this thing survive a raccoon? Because they were using it for things. So this one was Dave Latassi's, and it is not, it wasn't found together. It was 2 different pieces that he put together. One found one and found the other piece, just to show how it would work. So this one's a little hard to see, but the earliest ones, which probably go all the way back into paleo times, are gag hooks. And right in here, there's a groove cut. And that's where they would have tied, again, the line onto it, but they would have also tied it right around the little piece of food, or bait, whatever you want to call it. And then the fish would come and eat it this way, but when they pulled the string, the gag hook would turn sideways and get caught. Sometimes they're called a throat gorge. Let's see if I have it there. No, but in the book I gave it both names. So, and it just gets caught in the throat, and then they just pull the animal in. So those were probably much more common. And again, we look at, so that stuff, everything I showed you so far is archaic Gulf Coast. 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, maybe 6,000, whatever. So here's gags, this Pacific Northwest, and here they were still using the throat gorges or the gags, and here's one with just a single thing on it. And then they had, you know, like a trot line with a whole bunch of them on there. And so they were used in multiple fashions. We know that the Pacific Northwest people used this one because they were found, and they're in all different. And what's good about Hillary Stewart, I guess I've cut off this part of the page, but it talks about these code numbers here. Will tell you what museum they are on display at least at the time in the late 60s or early 70s when she wrote this book. So all these things were from display areas. And she had an artist do the drawings. And of course, here's your Walmart guy thinking this is a brand new gig thing for him to have his multiple hooks on a line or whatever. So multimedia hooks are hooks that have, it's not just 2 different pieces of bone or whatever. You've got wood, you've got bone, you've got sinew, you've got pitch, and you can see that the only thing we would find today is the pin part, because everything else would have dissolved. The wood, the line, the pitch, all that stuff is usually just gone. And you find these little pieces of pointy bone pins, the ends of them. Paul's got some in here, and again, they may just be broken bone pins, or they may have been part of one of these compound composite fish hooks that we know they did in the Pacific Northwest, and more than likely they were doing them on the Gulf Coast of Florida in the archaic times. Multimedia hooks are time-consuming to make. So it goes, if you want to spend the time to read all this, but basically they start with a piece of wood, they soak it, step 2, in a box. It's then put in here, it's steamed. They then have a mold that they make the wood curve. Then they've got to add the pin to it. Then they've got to wrap it, tie it. It's not something, however, you end up with a much bigger hook. So here's one Herman Trapman had made, and all out of stuff from Florida area, or actually from Pinellas County. That's where he lives in Gulfport. And that was in the book too. That was a sample he made just to show how it was done. So we talked about this. You can tell these are not your typical bone pins because you can see the part that's ground down there where it would have sat on to sit flush onto the piece of wood, or if it was on another attached to another bone. And again, those same bone pins were used on paleo points. So, and this is a little bit off the beaten topic because it's not part of fishing per se, but you've got a paleo point, you've got a bone pin. They would have had then sinew and pitch and glued that on there. And like, what good is that? Because if you were running through the woods and you had these great big spear thing, it's got a hollow tip. You stick this in here. You have an atlatl, it's a spear thrower. I don't know if Paul's got one here or not. you would throw this at your prey, maybe a mammoth or a mastodon, if you go back in paleo time, a horse, whatever you're aiming, it hits, this part sticks in, this part falls to the ground, the animal's going, oh my God, they're throwing spears at me. He starts running off, and all they do is, the Native American runs up, picks us up, loads another one of these in, and he just keeps throwing the same spear over and over, because he's got a whole pocket full of these things. He can't, if it's gonna take 7 or 8 or 10 spears, he can't be running around with 10 of these and then trying to throw them. It's just too much to manipulate. He's got one spear with this loaded up, but that design is very similar to what you find on a compound hook.
Paleo semi-auto.
Yeah. So, Pacific Northwest composite hooks, this is showing you how they could have done it. This is a really simple weight. You got your composite hook, they got a double hook going. And we know these type of rigs existed because they were found in the Pacific Northwest. And we find similar parts of those here. So the trot line is also not new. Neither is the fish hook organizer. I had a really similar thing to this part right here when I was growing up in Jersey. And it's just showing the trot line. This one has regular composite hooks on. The first trot line we showed you had the gag hooks on it. So Native American spearfishing, this is on the East Coast, and we can presume that this was also very similar in Florida. You've got a fence built across the river or lake or whatever. These guys are in a dugout canoe. Guys are spearfishing. And this is, I'm presuming if it's North Carolina 70As, it's probably some type of English colonial type of drawing of how Native Americans were fishing. And these themes are going to appear in the following slides. So, Leicester spears. Now, these are what the spears are, because if you just have a regular one-point spear and you spear a fish with it, the fish wiggles, he's off, he's gone. So they had these barbs on it. Then they realized a single one wasn't as good as having a triple one. This guy's got these barbs going in the opposite direction. So you look at the single one, you've got a Leicester spear with the triple. This says metal barbs, so once they became familiarized in the Pacific Northwest with Europeans coming in, they realized the advantage of having metal as opposed to spending God knows how long to carve a bone like that. So we look at the Leicester spear, and these, I think these were Paul's, and these are partial ones. They don't have too much down. It's got a little break there. This one's got a little nick on the tip, a little part of that point's missing. I've never found one of these, but and I've had archaeologists at the Weeden Island Gulf Coast and at different things say, well, there's no evidence that they ever had Leicester spears in Florida. We're finding them because they will also, the same people will tell you, we're not really sure that these are bone fish hooks. This happened at a Weeden Island presentation, and I raised my hand if it's not a fish. They didn't find a bass on the end of it. So a lot of professional archaeologists are what we call ultra-conservative. They want absolute proof that something is what they said. And that came from a guy named Lou Binford in the late 60s, early 70s, who debunked a lot of what archaeologists were doing. And then the archaeologists went from one end where they were just wildly speculating to being beyond ultra-conservative. So I raised my hand at that and said, well, if they're not fish hooks, what are they? And I baited her and I reeled her in because what she said, well, maybe they're made to hook clothing. Maybe they're, well, what makes more sense? That they're a fish hooker, and why do we only find them in rivers? And, it just goes on and on. So the Leicester spear supposedly never existed in Florida, but these are found. And here's some more on them. These ones, one set was from Tampa. These, again, they're broken. Probably hard to find them holes, just missing some of the shanks, some of the point. This one's almost whole, just missing a little bit of barb. And so just like the fish hooks, probably way more often found broken because they're small, they're delicate. And when you get them, like when I find a fish hook, the first thing I do is go back. Even if I'm in the middle of a dive, I'll go to my dock, go to my boat, whatever, take it, put it up, wrap it, because if you put it in with other stuff and you get done, it's usually in a million pieces. They're delicate. You got to dry them out slowly and whatever. So, and there's the Walmart guy. There he is, man. He's not such a new invention. And because it's illegal in Florida, and I guess probably other states too, to spear any kind of game fish, Walmart calls these frog gigs. I don't know how many people go gigging for frogs anymore, but that's what they sell them as. And then you would put it on a end of a, you know, a pole or whatever, a broomstick or something. So, yeah. This was an interesting find because this Andreas Kerner found this in deep muck in Lake Rousseau, which is a dammed up part of Withlacoochee, and the preservation of it was so good you can see the part that had the pitch on it right there, and then you can see the rest of the bone pin, and then you can see the tapered part on this that comes to where it was attached to something. So that's you know, twine or whatever else, and in this, yeah, so that's a pretty cool piece. I didn't bring this, I guess I forgot to. This is mine, I found this on Rainbow River. It's a deer antler tine. So deer antler, you know, their antlers come up, and at the end, there's all these points. And they say, oh, it's a 7-point or a 12-point. I don't know, I guess they have to have an even number. I don't know. I've never been deer hunting. But anyway, I found this on the Rainbow River. I label all my stuff. 4 of 98. I think it makes the cut line before they said you can't pick up artifacts anymore. So that was probably before they did away with the isolated artifacts. It's hollow on this end. It comes into about here, and it would have been on stuff. Now, I was told that maybe they were using it to spear manatees. There doesn't seem to be any evidence in Florida, at least up to a point, where Native Americans hunted for manatees. You know, they had to be in the clear rivers, and they had to be easily seen, and this and that. But a manatee is a massively huge animal, and they're in a dugout canoe that's narrower than this table. I don't know how they balanced them. If you've ever seen dugout canoes, you know how they didn't end up in the water constantly. They got baskets on their head, and they're doing all, and they're paddling, whatever. But they're certainly not pulling up I don't know how much a manatee weighs, a ton and a half or whatever, you know, 1,800-pound manatee by spearing it. The other thing that people don't realize is that manatees and marine mammals, their bones are super, super dense because they're used for ballast. That's what makes them sink. It's the same reason us as divers wear a weight belt, because we're getting a whole thing of air, and then we're trying to dive down in the water. We wouldn't stay down. So manatees, whales, dolphin, dugong, all of them, what happens is, and we found this out, and there's a situation that happened in Alaska about 20 years ago. But anyway, if you spear a manatee and it goes through its lungs, all the air goes out of it and it sinks to the bottom. And you certainly are not going to pull it up off the bottom of a river or a lake. That's just not going to happen. And the reason I bring it up is because there was a Native American group in Alaska that finally got their rights back to hunt for whales. And they hadn't done it in over 100. It was a tribal thing and it's ancestral. So they went on these 2 motorboat looking things, and they had this spear thing, and they had no clue how to hunt for whales, and they speared the whale before they realized it had a calf with it, and the first thing the whale did was sink, and it actually took the boat right down with it, and everyone had to jump off and get on the other boat because they had no clue how to go whale hunting from small boats. A whale's a big animal, and you cannot spear it through the lungs because the air goes out of it. It was a mess. These were Brian Evanson's. I asked him, do you have any of this or that when I was writing the book, and it was like, there's nothing like, drilled shark teeth. I had like one picture of one. Mark Renz had a big one that was drilled, and a guy named Willie had one. And I go to Brian Evanson's, he brings a tray after tray after tray of, drilled shark teeth, and he had these ceremonial spear tips that were similar to the one there. This one was Andreas's, but I can't think of the guy's name who used to live in West Palm. It'll come to me. Anyway, so it's barbed. This would have been the pointy end, because otherwise, if you stuck it in that way, the barbs wouldn't work. So you have to go in the opposite way. Anyway, when you look at it, and I don't know if, this is work. Here's one without barbs. So this has got a roughed end. It's a point. It's ivory. It's a 4-shaft tip, possibly, or it could be a spear. Webb and those guys found this during the Osceola River project. And everyone said, well, what good is this because it's so curved? And We know that ivory tusks are curved, and curved spears do not work. However, just like anything else, their belief was that they took that, carved it, and actually steamed it just like they did that wood to make it shape and straightened them. But then after sitting in the river for 10 or 12,000 years, because this is from a, I can't remember the Silver River project, was it mostly mastodons? I think it was all mastodons up there, right? Not mammoths. Anyway, it was probably mastodon ivory, and their belief was that the ivory actually had memory. After sitting back in the water for 8 or 10,000 years, it went back to its original curve, which is probably, let me see if I can go backwards, probably what also happened with this piece. Went back to the bone that went back to its original curve. Spiritual, this is all Florida stuff. So they had fishing lures. Now again, they didn't put the treble hook on the end of the lure. So this is what they were finding the people doing in the Pacific Northwest. They're in a canoe, they have a pole that they're pushing this thing down, and then they would pull the pole up out of the way, and it would spin its way up, the fish would follow it, and then the guy would spear the fish with the Leicester spear as it followed the lure in. So they didn't have, now,
That's interesting.
I don't know if Paul's ever found it, but I know Jim was telling me that they used to find lures in Steenhatchee. I've never found one. I live on the, I have a house on the river there.
That might be a couple of those little small ones.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Here
So,
with the drilled.
and when the, obviously sometimes if they made stuff out of wood, they talked about willow because it's kind of silvery and bright or whatever, and whatever wood they would make, those would be long gone. But if they made it out of bone, anything they made out of bone had a chance to preserve, and we have a chance to find it maybe. So here's what the lures look like. Now this person obviously is very dedicated to spend that much time to put a little head on it. But again, these are made of wood, and they're gone. Yeah, strips of white willow. And again, this they would want the curve, so when they pulled, this one had a hole in it. And this is all you would really need if it's shiny. Pull it through the water, it's going to wiggle like this. Again, the fish would follow it. They would be spearing the fish. They didn't have a hook on the end of it. And here's your Walmart stuff. And the ones you'll see in the tray here are all ones I found diving in the Steenhatchee. They're similar to these, but they're not old. They're 20 years, 10 years. There's one really old one in here. This one was absolutely perfect. It's a wooden one with a little propeller. It was absolutely killer. And as soon as probably within, I got it the next morning and it looked like this. It dried out and warped, and had it been, it would have been an antique one minimally. Boat clubs, Pacific Northwest. This is what really, this was the first thing that clued me in and how close these cultures were. Now, the cultures, Pacific Northwest, probably 17, 16, 1700, all the way through the 1840s or something like that. Archaic Florida, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years. That's a huge gap in time. Plus, you're talking about a gap all the way across the country, from the Gulf Coast of Florida all the way up to Alaska. And yet the cultures were so similar. And you'll see, even with that temporal and the geographic distance, you're going to see what got me thinking this way. So these are boat clubs. These are some serious people. Well, if you've ever gone fishing for anything really large, and I have a buddy who used to go shark fishing, and you pull a shark on board, you pull a really big marlin, I don't know, whatever kind of fish you're going for, you gotta, I don't say put it out of its misery, but if you just pull it on the boat, it's gonna flop all over, you can get injured, this and that. You gotta club it. So you gotta club it and stop it from flopping. So these ones are ceremonial clubs, and they believe that these ones were like, say this would be like a Seahawk. So this would be the Seahawk clan. They would have this ceremonial club, and this is like a totem, the totem clan, and this is the ugly group clan. I don't know, whatever, but they're different clans. However, we look at this one, Key Marco. That's found in the Gulf Coast of Florida at Marco Island in Muck. There is, the Key Marco site now, initially they thought it was 3,000 or 4,000. Now they're looking at anywhere from 1,200 years to, but it's pre-Spanish, way pre-Spanish. It's 1,000 years old. That muck pile had so much stuff in it, and tons of it was from a fishing culture. Now, the little Key Marco, the little deer, and the this, and the Key Marco cat, and the masks, they got a little publicity. But they found tons and tons of fishing stuff that was composite, wood, shark teeth, this stuff. This was one of the few things that survived. When Cushing went in there and they started pulling stuff out of the muck, this is what happened to it. Paint went gone, got warped and looked like caca very quickly. He could literally look at it and just see the paint going. What made Cushing such a good guy was he went and, after the first day of work, he said, covered it all up. We're leaving. Went back up to Pennsylvania, got funding, came back 2 years later with a photographer to take pictures of it immediately because he didn't know which items would survive or not survive depending on the types of wood. All the stuff had beautiful paint. None of the paint survived. But back then he only had black and white photography. He also brought a watercolor artist with him to make watercolor pictures of all the stuff so they would know exactly what the colors and what everything looked like. So he was way ahead of his time. And if you ever have a chance to look at the book, it's not very long. It's been reissued by University Press of Florida. It's pretty cool, the whole thing. It took him like 4 days to go from Tampa to Key Marco by like a little schooner. I mean, stuff we would drive in a couple hours and whatever. And here's it. Walmart fisherman, you know, he's got looks suspiciously like a Louisville Slugger. And the guy I knew that was shark fishing is exactly what he had. He had a baseball bat. That's what he was clubbing the sharks with. So, whatever. So, fishing weights. These guys, if you're carving this out of stone, you take your fishing weights pretty seriously. That's all I can say. And so you look at these different types of fishing weights, and again, these have all been found at the Pacific Northwest. But what was more than likely were this type of weight. You'd have your composite hook, you'd have your cord in a way that once the fish bites, you don't want him to be dragging that weight because he's going to let go of it. It would immediately release this rock, and then he would just still be chewing on this and eventually hopefully get hooked. Well, now if you just found these rocks on the bottom of the river, they're just rocks. They didn't have to do anything. So I guarantee 98% of their fishing weights looked like this. These other ones were probably ceremonial type stuff when they were dancing around the fire or whatever. So this is probably much more likely, and those types of things might have been in Florida also. This is a drilled dolphin vertebrae from the Peace River. I found that over 25 years ago, a long time ago, and I thought it was fossils, one of those ones that was sitting on my shelf. And I had 2 things on my shelf back then when I first started. I had no clue what they were, and Tony Estevez came up and he goes, "Oh, that's really cool. That's a blah, blah, blah." I'm like, "Oh, wow. I'll take it out of my junk pile and I'll put it over this pile." So anyway, the dolphin vertebrae, they got the centrum, which is round. They have like 2 wings on them, and all they did was knock the wings off, and then you could immediately so the wings would have been right here, sticking out, and then you would have the soft marrow you could drill through relatively easily. And but again, it's going to float. They were actually using fossilized dolphin vertebrae. So it was kind of a stone, so it's heavy. Knocking them off, using them as fishing weights. And your Walmart guy is using lead, which is toxic and the absolute worst thing for the environment you could possibly do. But that's your Walmart fisherman. And floats and bobbers are things that make when you throw your bait in, it's not sinking on the bottom. You want it to be mid-range so the fish can see it and bite it. Again, these are some pretty serious floats. And again, these are probably ceremonial ones. And you got a duck and you got a otter, and this one's supposed to be a sea lion and supposed to whale. Anyway, a couple different whale ones. So net floats. Oh, this is a little halibut, which is a type of flounder because you got both eyes on the same side of the head. And the Walmart guy's got these fishing floats. Is this yours, Paul? Yeah, Paul, I don't know if you brought it or not. So we're not sure because he found it in the river, but it was obviously on the bottom of the river and they found it when they were diving. But if it was cut out of green bone, it might have actually been a float. So we don't really know if it was a sinker or if it was a float. And I think that's the way Paul had told me about it. You're not really sure but whoever made this out of bone, they spent a lot of time carving this in, and it would have had probably a line at each end doing whatever they were planning on doing with it. And again, you look at that and you look at the one on top. So this is the new thing where you can put line at both ends and blah blah blah. And so the two-man net, you've got floats on top, which is what they might have used those ceremonial floats for, because then you would have seen your little animals on top. You've got weights on the bottom, you got two poles. And this one, it's rolled up a little bit. This one my uncle and I used to use when I first came to Florida in the late 60s, early 70s, and we would walk along the shore like this, and we would send my brother, because he didn't care about fish anyway, and he would come running real fast and chase the little minnows, and then we would circle the minnows, and then, because that's what but back then they weren't made of monofilament, they were made out of cloth and they got heavy. And then once you got all the minnows trapped, we'd put them in a bait bucket, that's what we would go fishing with for trout. When I first came, we would be off the Skyway Bridge, the lower part of the Skyway, and it was nothing for us to catch 70, 80, 90 trout, nice size ones, and clean them all up. There was no limit back then. They weren't running out of anything, and those days are gone. So there you go. So this is the Pacific Northwest. Again, most of this stuff we wouldn't find. You saw the dolphin vertebrae, we would find that, but the floats are made of wood, the nets were made of cordage back then, that would all be gone. I don't have a picture of it. They found these nets just like that at Key Marco. Just like all the netting, floats, sinkers on the bottom made out of whatever, on the poles or with cords where it would attach to. So that culture went across the country, and it also went temporally for thousands of years. And we think of culture as moving really, really fast. Technology, from maybe not a lot of you people, but like Fred, I know, and Paul, they grew up long before the days of computers, and I don't know, Fred might have been before the days of TV. I don't know if they had TV when he was a kid or not, but when I grew up with black and white. I remember when color TV came. I remember the screen was this big and everybody huddled around the TV or whatever. My dad was before TV, and he remember when the radio came in. So technologies, but now it moves faster and faster and faster. Back then, the technological stuff didn't move that fast. Cultures didn't have a way to disseminate the information that quickly. And if something worked, you used it until somebody finally came up with something a little better or improved. So it traveled across the country. It stayed there for a long time because this stuff worked. And we know it worked and it worked well. Now, they didn't have pollution and this and that, so there was a lot more fish and the bounty was better. But their lives depended on catching this stuff. And if we look at the Gulf Coast of Florida, the Florida Gulf Coast is where all our mounds and this and that, one of the only cultures in the world ever to assimilate massive cultures with no agriculture, or almost no agriculture. That's how bountiful Tampa Bay was and all that stuff with scallops and fish and this and that. Man, why don't we need a farm? Let's just go out and get some oysters today, or clams, or whatever else, and there was enough, I'm sure, wild berries and other stuff growing. So you got some nets. Most of the floats were not like the ceremonial ones. They were probably simple, just pieces of cut wood. And here's my net sinker, previously shown. Might have also been a net weight, so it could have been and your hand nets, the Walmart hand net, certainly an innovation. They could not have had this, could they? They had that too back then. There it was, and I mean, it smacks. I mean, you're looking at it going, okay. And in fact, some of these were so good, they actually had a drawstring on it that once they netted the fish, they would pull a string and it would close it, so it couldn't jump out either. So they were even better than, Walmart guy doesn't have that. He's got to scoop it and hope he doesn't screw up. So anyway, and let's see if they were ecologically sound. Because the Native Americans were so ecologically, no, not necessarily totally. These guys have put a barricade across the entire river. They got a platform, they're netting, they're spearing. None of the salmon are ever going to make it up there. They're, too bad. Next year's catch ain't going to be so good. The bears upriver aren't going to have any. So this minnow trap, this is mine from when I was a kid. It snaps together here. And you put little pieces of bread in it, and it had a string on it. There's a loop somewhere, and I would throw it out in the water, and we'd start our fire because we were camping. The next morning we'd get up, and there'd be all kinds of minnows in there, and that's what we would use to go fishing with. And here's a guy throwing a basket version one from Thailand or wherever that guy's from, but relatively modern, but still old school. I don't know, minnow traps, and perhaps even a better design. But I mean, it's smack. So what happens is, if you look, there's reeds that go in this way that point. The minnows swim in, and then when they turn around, all they see is those points come out, and they will not swim out of there. The same thing with the metal one that I had, because like, there's nothing really. They could, if they were careful, they could swim right back out. They swam right in, but they will not. It's just like a crab trap. Crabs will go in those crab traps, and then they turn around, and all they see is this at them, and then they stay in there. And so, fishing wares are really a curious thing in the Pacific Northwest. So this is a river. The river is coming down. It's opening up into a bay or the Gulf, or in Florida would be the Gulf. Up there would be some kind of bay or an estuary or whatever. And they figured out if they put stones and threw stones in the river and made patterns out of them, at high tide, all the fish would be coming. Let's use this middle one right here. All the fish would be swimming in, and they would want to swim back out at low tide, but when the tide got low, as they started coming downriver, by the time they made it here, if they came just slightly off, they were stoned in it. But instinct is telling them, go this way, and then they're just stuck in there, stuck in there. And they would just come and spear and just collect them. So in the Pacific Northwest, there's still, you can still take aerial pictures of where there's evidence of them still at the estuaries and the rivers up there. And I guarantee they use that stuff here. Now, our rivers tend to be more sandy and silty. We have hurricanes, and so this stuff has probably long since been obliterated. But hard to believe they wouldn't have used this technology. Tackle mob. So the Walmart, and actually this is a little bit earlier because this was actually made of Bakelite. And I think Bakelite ended in the 1930s or 40s. It's kind of a pre-plastic type of thing. But that's a tackle box that I got from my uncle when I used to go with him. But the tackle box, it's got to be a new invention. Now, this is the type of tackle box they would have used. Now, you can't see here. You can kind of see right there where there's a little light spot, like a slot. There's two slots. They would have had it on a lanyard around their waist. They might have had their fish hooks in there. They would have had line in there, whatever they would have had. And again, here's your bone pin. Now, this is a fresh bone pin, like it's a modern replica that Herman made. And that's how they would have kept that, wrapped all that stuff up, stuck the bone pin through it, and walked around and used it. So it's just made out of deer skin. That would have been their version of a tackle box. They didn't make wooden boxes to walk around in. So I brought this tackle box. This is an interesting story. It's probably a 1940s tackle box. My neighbor was cleaning out. He ended up giving it to the guy across the street next to me. The guy across from him, Bert, lived there for his father, 60, 70 years. And we did not know it was a tackle box. These my wife had, she got a cricket, so anything that stands still for too long gets something stuck on it. But, which it does look cool, you'll see it. But it was a lot of restoration on my part. I do restore, that's one of my other hobbies, I restore antiques. It's a cool one, and I was at, where's Bob Livengood at? That flea market up on, what's that one all the way up there
19,
on
up in Homosassa.
up by Homosassa. And there's a guy there who sells these antique tackle boxes. They're like $300, $400, $500 each. I'm like,
I have some on
hey.
eBay right now.
Huh?
I have some on eBay.
Oh, there you go. And some at $200, depending on how good they are. This one was totally just beaten. You can see there's a little bit of the bottom. I had to fix the bottom, and I didn't. It still has the original bottom, but I turned the bottom, made a frame, and poured 2-part epoxy in the bottom, and just solidified the whole thing because it was sitting in the water in this guy's garage. I thought it was a toolbox, and as I kept working on these different parts of the shelves and taking it all apart, all of a sudden I started finding like feathers stuck into the muck in there, and he had, you know, there was screws and stuff, and all of a sudden there was some fish hooks in the bottom. All of a sudden I realized, oh my God, this is an old antique tackle box. So, and it's way old. Unfortunately, this handle is not the original because you can see 2 other holes right here. So at some point they screwed the handle up and they put, this handle's probably old. It's probably like a 1950s handle, but in the 1930s or 40s, whenever they made the box. And so it's pretty cool. So you never know what you're going to find. You just got to keep your eyes open. And as far as antiques go, here's my, and how many people have watched Antique Roadshow? Yeah, almost everybody. And what do they tell you? Oh, well, if somebody hadn't refinished it, it would be worth so much more. Well, if it looks like caca, I don't want it in my house. And if you don't take care of the wood, eventually it just continues to disintegrate and you have nothing. So yes, now if you're telling me that Paul Revere made this and painted those fish on the front, I won't mess with it. You know, but other than that, these things that were probably made, these ones I wouldn't say, no, they may have been made by the thousands. I don't know how many they made. It's probably by the hundreds minimally. And so, you know, I fix stuff up so all the antiques in my house look cherry. I mean, they look killer. And I have tons of antiques that I've done. I've done a few things for Mike and them, and boxes and whatever. So, let's see, forward. Ooh. The fillet knife. You gotta have a fillet knife. You got to caught this fish. You gotta do something with them. So this is a Noonan point. The first point I ever found is still the best point I've ever found. It's an almost 5-inch rose-colored Noonan. And I found it on the rainbow, and I'm like, well, whoa, holy smokes. And it came out, I want to say I think it was base first, and the base was sticking out, and it was in the sand, and I'm like, and I grabbed it, like, please be whole, William, please be whole. And I know Paul's probably done that too, but please, and people have done that with the big sharkies. Please be whole, please. Yes! You know, and of course, a lot of times you pull them out, they're not whole. But that was just a killer one. And the reason I did these two, so I ran into a book, and to figure out the quality of craftsmanship on a point, they measure the widest part of the point and divide it by how wide the point is. And you get a ratio like 8:1, 7:1, 9:1. And so the higher the ratio, 9:1 means it's really thin for how big that point is. It's really thin as opposed to a big fat honky thing that wasn't very well carved and the guy was kicked out of the tribe or something. This guy was an artisan who made this thing. So the tough part when you peak really early, like 30 years ago, I'm still looking for another. I mean, I found a lot of killer points, but not like this. This is just rose colored and like ah. Oh, and the best part of this, and I think it was Paul told me this, about a month after I got it home, it just turned white and it looked terrible. And they said soak it in not baby oil, mineral oil. Soak it. I mean, it was taken. Soak it in mineral oil for. I soaked it in overnight, and I've never had to re-soak it. It just stayed that way. It soaked it up, and so it got like a patina. Like, oh man, it looks so. You soak it in mineral oil. Brought the colors, and I said, how long do you leave it? He goes, you leave it in until it looks like the color that you remember what it looked like underwater. So, like a day or two later, I was like, okay, I look like the way I remember it underwater, and I've never had to re-soak it. So this was a replica made by Mark Condren. It's a long story. He was a member of our club. He used to do presentations on napping here. He has since passed away, very young, in his 30s, from cancer. But he had made this one. It's a point, and that's how those points. So a lot of these big 5-inch. That's it's not an arrowhead. The shaft on that thing is just, you would have to have a cannon. The pole would be, I mean, you know, oh, those are huge arrowheads. No, they're not even, a lot of these are not projectile points. They're probably knife blades. So this one, I don't know if this is Paul or if this was Tatum's, but it's a beautiful deer antler handle. It's hollowed out where they would have stuck the blade in there and then filled it with pitch and then wrapped it or whatever. But what's cool about this one, it's totally worn. That person used that deer antler handle for years and years and years. So instead of being really knobby looking and crisp looking in here, it's all hand worn from just years of use, which is really cool. Walmart fillet knife. Hey, me get the nod there. I don't know. You know, there's I'm usually giving the nod. So scale scraper. So one of the things is a lot of fish have scales on them. You got to scrape them off. Sometimes you skin the fish, but more than likely they were scaling the fish, because if you've ever skinned a fish, you need. Oh, go back. You need this kind of knife. You need something really sharp if you're going to skin the fish, as opposed to, you know, a stone point. Not that they couldn't have done that, but so you got these scales and you're thinking, oh, this has got to be something new. This was Barber Fights, and it's just a deer jaw, and they had cut it off. It looked like they were going to make a kid's one, or maybe they were getting ready to make it size for a kid or whatever. And your hand would have been here, and they would have just used that to scrape the scales off the fish. So that's Gulf Coast, that's Florida. Making fire to cook. Now, I know Fred is an Eagle Scout and he's produced more Boy Scouts than anybody in the world, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, and Fred taught them that you gotta rub 2 sticks together to make fire. I'm not giving you your little Eagle Scout feather or whatever, but their lives depended on fire. They never rubbed 2 sticks together. It's just too hard to make fire that way, if not impossible. They used a thing called a bow bearing. So, here's how it works. These ones are made of wood. The ones that we find in Florida are made out of bases of the deer antler. And so the deer antler base would be here. It would be shaped like this. They would put bear fat or some kind of fat in here. You have a column here. The bow, the cord wraps around once, and they saw it back and forth. They have a piece of hardwood. It has a little groove in here, and in here they have tinder. So when you saw that little bag, that little tackle box bag they're carrying, they always had tinder. They always had the cord. They always had this piece. And they could get stick anywhere. You know, they didn't have to carry the stick. And when Herman Trappman, I took the Herman Trappman picture because Herman Trappman drew this picture. Herman Trappman's artwork is unbelievable. But initially I had a black and white photo of Herman. He came into my driveway and he goes, "This is how the bow bearing works." He made fire in like 15 seconds. I mean, he had the tinder thing or whatever, and he had the little board. I was like shocked. He started, so next thing the smoke is coming up, next thing, whoo, I'm like, whoa. I mean, it was amazing, and your life depends on it. You're not rubbing 2 sticks together. No. The Walmart fisherman still may win this one, though. It's still a little torch thing, so, you know, I finally give it the nod to the Walmart fisherman. So how do we know whether, so they would have fishing camps, just like they would have hunting camps. They would have areas where fishing was good, instead they would set up a camp there. They would procure their fish, piles of it, and then process it, either dry the fish out, smoke it, squeeze it. In the Pacific Northwest, they were getting oil out of the fish. They were, you know, squeezing oil out of them somehow, putting it into clay pots or whatever. So I have some of this stuff here in, I guess it's in this drawer here. You'll see it. So these are, it's another one of the drawers from in here. And I'll put it on top of,
Put it on top of it, won't hurt it.
yeah, but I'm just gonna leave it here. People are gonna want to see your stuff though, Paul. So anyway, you can come in here and look. So I'm diving on the Santa Fe one time, and there's your fossils and there's grass, and there's a section where we found a wood site where there was tons of fossil wood in there, and we found a couple pine cones. And all of a sudden I hit the site. Hey, occasionally when I'm diving, you find a fish spine or snap. And there's literally just piles and piles of fish spines. Just piles of them. And some of them are, there's 3 or 4 compartments of in there. That's because they were processing fish there. So a good indication that you're at a campsite is if you find the spines. And the spines could be along the back, or they could be the little things that are part of the fins sticking out to the side. And you can tell the ones that go along the back, because they're symmetrical. The ones that come out of the side are asymmetrical. The ones that are asymmetrical are going to be the right or left. And fish scales, I think I have both those cases there. The Jerry Zog case that were popular back in the late 60s, early 70s. And little plastic cases he got. These are garfish scales, and these are, that's probably garfish. I don't know what the other ones are from, those big ones, but they're fish scales. Sturgeon ones? Sturgeon. Okay. You got me. But anyway, so if you're finding a lot of fish scales, fish vertebrae, here's fish jaws, which are common if you're finding, you'll find bunches of them. Usually find a lot of pottery shards if there's a campsite, because again, that's what they're storing the oils and that kind of stuff in. So pottery shards, you'll find those at a fish campsite. Oh, I guess I did bring, there's the big point. There's the deer antler tine. This is a piece of, it's a piece of Eocene, like rib bone from rainbow. It's not like anything else in rainbow. It's pitch black and it's rounded. It probably was used as a little napping tool to pressure flake, to put the fine flakes on these. So you get all different kinds of points that you would find in a fish site. My son found this, and he had no clue he was home. He was in the Marines. He was home on leave, and I come over to see him in rainbow. If anyone's been in rainbow, it's like pool water. It's clear. You can you're diving and somebody else could be 40 feet away and you could look over and see where they're diving. And so I swim over to him and he's going like this because you're underwater. He reaches in a little bag and he holds out, it's called a plummet. It's got a carved groove in here. It looks like it's made of stone, but Carlos Tatum said they're actually made of really thick shell. Some kind of really, and when you look at it, it makes sense because the shell has, so he knew right away what it was. And so I knew it was a plummet. I'm looking at it, I'm blowing bubbles going, I'm going bonkers underwater. And it's not that people don't find plummets, they find them occasionally, but because I was with somebody that found a plummet, I will never find a plummet. That's how rare they are. And because I just told you I was with somebody, you may never find a plummet. So they're pretty hard to come by. So, and it's a perfect one. And they called it plummets because there was a guy named, Mark Twain, which wasn't his real name. He was Samuel Longhorn Clemens. And in his early career, he was on a boat going up and down the Mississippi, and they would put a plummet like this, except it was made of bronze or brass or whatever, on a rope string, and they would lower it till it hit the bottom. And when it hit the bottom, they could tell, and they would say Mark Twain, and they would mark the Twain, and they would come up and measure. Oh, we're in 40 feet of water, 30 feet of water. So when archaeologists first started finding plummets, they called them plummets. The only thing that doesn't make any sense in Florida, especially on the rainbow, because you can go in the rainbow and it's 70 feet down and still see little bass swimming around. And a bass may be this big, but 70 feet down. They don't need to know. They don't need to plumb the bottom. The rivers and springs were just that clear in early times. And then finally somebody went through the records, just like the hairpins for bone pins and that, and they found the old Spanish that were unbelievable record keepers. The Spanish would come, study the culture, draw all the jewelry they were wearing. This turned out to be like a jewelry, like it would keep away evil spirits. And then they would annihilate and enslave all the people. But they had good records of them, really good records. So that's why we know what this stuff is. So this is a book by Hillary Stewart, Indian Fishing, Early Methods on the Northwest Coast. And it's a really killer book. I would guess it's out of print, but you probably could find it on the internet or whatever if you're really into it. I believe I still have my copy. A lot of times I lend stuff out and it never comes back. See people. Anyway, but it's unbelievable that she went through and you didn't see 1/50th of what's in this book. I mean, there's a ton of stuff, but I started seeing the similarities between what Cushing was finding at Marco Island and what some of our divers were finding here in the Tampa Bay area. And it was too much. So I did this presentation for the Weeden Island for the Central Gulf Coast Archaeological Society. Their main advisor is what's Bob's last name? Bob Austin. Bob Austin. So I've gotten to know Bob really well because my wife's uncle married his ex-wife. That was a little sticky, but anyway. Anyways, I got to know Bob or whatever. So I did this presentation for them, and I went up to Bob after. I said, "So, Bob, he's a professional archaeologist. How close did I get it?" He goes, "I would love to be able to say what you can say, but because they're so bound by being so conservative, they can't say these things." He goes, "But you nailed it." He goes, "Absolutely, these cultures were very similar. They didn't progress that much in that sense. Maybe other parts of their cultures progressed, but the things that worked, they didn't have to progress." And so, anyway, boom, those are my books. Somebody wants them. I have 4 left of the draft copies for $40. After that, they go up to $60 for the non-draft copies. Means draft copies had some spelling errors, and when we got them all fixed, and I ordered 100 books, they used the wrong disc and still did with all the spelling. So I've been selling, I only got 4 left of the draft copies. I just tried to bring some of these and I couldn't find any at home, so I don't know if
We got a couple of the.
you might have a couple of those. I think we're selling for $35. And I did bring some of these for $10. I don't know if he's got them. They might have them for $12 or $15 or something. But anyway, so if anybody wants a signed copy, I did bring my little, some of my stuff that I found. I guess Paul brought a lot of stuff. He's been diving for a long time. He's got a lot of killer stuff from, and it's hard to tell whether it's, it could be early archaic, mid archaic. You get that bone stuff, you really don't know truly how old it is. We know a lot of the gag hooks, and if a carved bone item is big enough that you can tell what it's made out of, like Paul's got a beautiful, it's a vertebral spike from a mammoth or a mastodon. But Well, we know that was carved by paleo people because those were proboscideans that went extinct 12,000 years ago or whatever. Or if you find things that are carved out of a horse or camel material. And I've got, in the Which Fossil Can Tell You book, we talk about that. So, and then you can look at those same things and realize, oh, they continue to make those same things into the archaic times. And in this book, I also have a few pictures from Tatum from Nebraska stuff that he found as a kid. The exact same tools that they were using. So that's it for me. I'm trying to think if I had any other, if anyone has any questions. Okay,
we're going to go into show and tell. Start off with Bill Fosher,
okay.
our Vice President, Treasurer. That's you up there.
Yeah. It's not my laundry. So, my daughter and I have been going out to hunt dinosaurs this was our 6th year. David did the first year, and then the next 5 years have been my daughter and I. The last 3 years we've hunted the same ranch in eastern Montana. And that first year we were on that ranch, we found a site, we found a chunk of what's called a sensortical vertebrae of a Triceratops. It was on the surface. Usually we're finding fossils, it's on a hill, you're climbing up. There was one spot this year, it was 12 feet up. I had to cut holes in to stand up there and dig on it. This was flat ground, and the first thing there was sensortical vertebrae, which is the Triceratops head is so heavy that the first 4 vertebrae are fused to hold the weight. And so I found that. We started prospecting around that, and there was bone everywhere. So that first year we found two upper jaw sections, a lower jaw section. One of the upper jaw sections had 10 rows of teeth. The last day on that first year we weren't sure if it was an ischium or ilium or if it was a piece of frill because it was face down. So with like 3 hours to go on the last day, they said, all right, we'll cover it back up again, you'll see next year. Okay. And so we did find it, and it's what's called a squamosal. And a squamosal is 1/4 of the frill. It's one of the outside pieces of the frill of a Triceratops. We got that back from Rob, who prepped it for me 2, maybe 3 months ago. And probably the best thing about that, it's complete, it's gorgeous. But the nice thing about it is it actually has damage on it about that big, which is very, very likely damage from sparring with another Triceratops. And I've actually found an article that talked about, but some paleontologists, I'm not sure if people know who Paul Serino is. He was the editor of the article, and of the ones they checked, roughly 10 out of 60 squamosals had damage from not necessarily another Triceratops, but it was prevalent enough that that's likely what it was. So anyway, we're back this year, looking around, going a little bit further. We did all the edges of basically a 15 by 15 foot section, and that's when we found this. And so the funny thing is the first section of it we found,
Anticipation.
it's coming off really, looks like a big piece of copper light, a big turd. And it's like, this is the biggest T-Rex turd ever. But that's not what it was. And so let me see. I might need help with this one. Yeah, so I can get. All right.
It's like Geraldo Rivera going into looking for Al Capone's vault. Okay.
So, let's see. Yeah, this section is what we uncovered first that looked like the big piece of coprolite. Obviously, it wasn't. We were uncovering that at the same time. I moved a little further off there and then found some of the shaft here. And this is a Triceratops humerus. And Rob prepped it out for me. We just got back about a month and a half ago, and he already got it prepped and good to go here. So from that site, we've got the squamosal, we've got this, we've got 2 ribs, coracoid, 3 pieces of jaw, 15 loose teeth, and 3 or 4 other bone pieces. We're not sure what they are. But we've got a lot of what looks like the same animal at that site. We've expanded it now from 15 by 15 to 15 roughly by 22. But I went around all the edges there this year, and this looks to be the last of what's there in that one spot. So.
So you don't think that there's any more big bones left in that area?
Well,
Like that?
at least in that section, and we did go around the edges. I went around the edges with a pickaxe, about 3 feet in. But you know, with a dinosaur, you could have it as far as 100 yards away from, you know, where things are found. So.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Did you take out for the airplane or did you bring it back?
I actually got my pickup truck so we could bring stuff back, not only from the dinosaur stuff, but also from when we go out to Nebraska.
And has anybody here been to see the Triceratops in downtown Tampa at Leisure?
I'm gonna go.
Not many people. It's a pretty impressive Triceratops. Bill, I guess Bill hadn't been. That's a, nope, you should be down here on your knees.
Well, I'd like to bring stuff with me and say, okay, does this fit?
It's an amazing dinosaur, and unless you have kids, it's all you're going to see that day because it is a children's museum with a dinosaur in it.
Is it there permanently, or is it just there for a
I
short time?
think it's 3 years.
3 years?
3 years?
Yeah.
3 year thing.
But it's the real dinosaur. It's real bone. Mike Davis, come on up.
Well, Bill's a tough act to follow, but at least I'm not following Joe. So, a year ago, last spring, Leslie and I went out on the same dinosaur hunting expedition that Bill goes on every year, to the same ranch where Bill found his Triceratops. And I found a tooth from the critter that may have eaten his Triceratops. This is a tip of a Tyrannosaurus rex tooth. It was probably about, a foot long when it was in his jaw. And this is unfortunately all I found of it. It was in 23 pieces. This thing was in 23 pieces. I saw the tip, which was still whole. And I stopped, and I said, okay, I got a tooth here. And I very laboriously sorted through all of the little bits of bone and debris and stuff. And Leslie actually found some hadrosaur teeth in that same pile. And this was unfortunately all of this tooth I could find. Like I said, I'm not following Joe, but this is actually, it does have a Joe Brandon connection because I gave all the 23 pieces to him. He glued them back together for me.
Wow.
Filled the cracks, painted it to match, and it is just absolutely beautiful. Still got serrations on the side. So, anyway, it's very fun if you ever get a chance to go hunting dinosaurs out in Montana. It is a whole lot of fun. So, give it a shot.
Bill's driving.
Oh yeah, you want your thing back.
It's in there.
I really need to do that.
Thank you.
Especially I saw so much Old Creek stuff. I need
Next,
to go.
we have Sina Searle.
Trying to get out of that light. So the first thing we
back from Rob. I go hunting in Nebraska every year. And this one I did not find. Mike found it. So he probably saw that side of it, which is not very pretty on that side, but as you know, if you dig something up, you may have a nice show side. That's an Oreodon. That was like a animal that was like a goat type of animal, sometimes aquatic. But that's an Oreodon skull. And then one day our whole group was hunting a valley or an area, and everybody was complaining they weren't finding anything. And I walked up this valley, it looks like nobody had been up there for a long time because this was half exposed. You can see how white it is here. That's how exposed it was. All the dark was still under the matrix. Just perfect little basketball sticking out of the hill. It was nice.
That is gorgeous.
I haven't looked at it really close yet, so wow, that was pretty. I haven't seen it up close.
Is that all real, Bob, or Rob? How much of that how much restoration on that?
None. That's what I thought. We had one piece that had fell out, and love it. So this guy was probably found about 10 years ago. I put it in foil. It's in 30 pieces. We just now started going through some of our stuff in our garage. I pulled it out and started putting it together, and it was probably, hey Rob, you think it was like 75% there? The tooth? So he filled in all the spots that were missing, just a little piece, but they were like little slivers. And but that is a Titanothere incisor, and I was just surprised I got so much of it together. I always pick up little piles. If I see a tooth that's exploded, I always pick them up and then just try to put it back together, see what's going to happen. So I was happy with that one. That was a nice surprise.
Sean and Dr.
Can we leave it here?
Yeah. Sean and Dr. Leslie are very patient, and they'll sit on the ground for an hour picking stuff up like that. We think they're nuts. Then they come home with a nice tooth like that. Thank you.
Nice job.
Jacob? Run around. Do you want to share this light over here?
That's quite a bit to follow up on. So, and I actually brought them in today looking for, hoping for some other people to take a look at them. Two very big shark teeth, one of which is from Morocco, the other is most likely North Carolina. Yeah, it's a big old Meg. I got this one earlier this week at there was a little show in St. Petersburg. I saw this one on sale there. And what I noticed is the shape, it might be kind of hard to see from further away, but the shape seemed a little bit off. It almost forms like a bowl right here in the center. And I was thinking, is that a big pathological one? But I'm always hesitant to put labels like that on things without getting the opinion of someone, without getting some other people to look at it first and confirm whether they think it's pathological, or maybe there was some odd position in the jaw that occasionally looked like that. So I figured I'd bring it in and ask around it. And it is big. It is not 6 inches. It is very close. I used a digital caliper to measure it as soon as I got back home because I was very anxious to know, was it 6 inches? I didn't bring a ruler with me, and the person who was selling it didn't have a ruler. And so what I actually did was I went to a nearby booth that had a ruler, used it to measure my iPhone, and then used my iPhone to measure all of his teeth, seeing are any of them big enough that they might be 6 inches. And this one wound up being, I think, like 5.9. So yeah, and then this other one, this one I got almost a year ago. It's a Moroccan tooth, so this one is decently older, probably about, for those who don't know, most of the Moroccan shark teeth come from, I believe it's called the Ouled Abdoun Basin. most of the teeth in there, it's actually one of those weird formations. It crosses the boundary of the Cretaceous extinction. So you have fossils in there that were as old as 70 million years old and as young as 40 million years old. And you'll get some big shark teeth out of there occasionally from what is believed to be Megalodon's ancestor. And that's what this was sold to me as. But I took a look at it, and if you've ever seen those big teeth from what's called Otodus obliquus, you'll know that they have those big cusps on the side. But this one doesn't. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe they broke off. Well, I took a closer look at it when I got home, and at least on this side, I can't find any evidence that there was ever a cusp there. I thought, okay, maybe it was just poorly restored. So I tested it using acetone. I looked at it using a black light, took pictures of the area using a microscope that I have. There is no evidence there was ever a cusp there. And so, also the overall shape of the tooth is it's significantly thicker than what I've seen with otodus teeth. And so my question is this a pathological otodus? Because it is pretty big. Usually you get them around 2 inches. You will occasionally see them this size. And that should rule out anything else. But my other question is it pathological, or is this possibly even a different species? One that I was looking at is this weird thing called Parotodus, I believe it's called. But he's not supposed to be that old. He's a very close relative of Megalodon. He's in that same, I believe he's in that same family called the Otodonts. That's Megalodon, Auriculatus, Angustodens, and Otodus obliquus, which is what this is supposed to be. But yeah, so I figured I'd show it around. I figured I'd bring it here, show it around to some people. Maybe someone sees something I didn't. There is a tiny bit of restoration on this side, and so maybe there might have been a cusp over here. I don't know. It's just such a bizarre looking tooth in terms of its proportions and its morphology. I figured, why not bring it in and ask around? Worst someone could tell me is, hey idiot, it's just an otodus that just didn't have a cusp on one side. They just were like that sometimes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Should I put those over there?
You're in front.
Okay, just so you want people to look at them.
You can.
Make comments.
Put them up front like you auction them off, so be careful.
Just put them on box.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, you put them up front, they'll auction off.
He won't auction them.
And
Oh no, I got my eye on them.
really, a lot of this show and tell has been the Rob Carlson show, because he put all this stuff together, but Rob has some of his own stuff he'd like to show that will stay at his house. Oh, okay. And if anybody else has stuff you brought, we'll bring it up.
I brought a few treasures tonight. The first one, we had our first field trip out to Center Hill this past Wednesday, and of course, the first field trip after a long summer of rain is always the best. And I was able to find quite a few echinoids, so I've got a bunch of them here for people to look at to get an idea of what you can find when you go on the Center Hill trips. Did get one little crab also, and if you saw my article last month, I was looking around and actually found bryozoa also, which a couple of the people on the trip, it was fun, had already seen the newsletter article, so we were all looking for bryozoa. But I've also brought a couple of other things from my trip out west in May. Our Wyoming ranch, we were collecting the last day of the trip, which you can attest to this, Mike, happens more often than you'd want it to. It was about 3:30 in the afternoon. I was whipped last day. Was about ready to call it quits and found a beautiful green tortoise, perfect in the ground. So I said, okay, that's the end of my trip. I dug it up, jacketed it. I called my friend Sue on the radio and said, I'll meet you at the front of the ranch where it's nice low ground because she had gotten tired. And I said, you can wander around there for a while and I'll meet you. So I met her up there with the tortoise, and the other two people that are on the trip with us were digging up two huge tortoises. And they said, we're gonna be about another half an hour. So I said, okay, so we started wandering around, and this little snout was sticking out of the ground. And so I said, well, I've got a half an hour. I glued it, started working back, and hit vertebrae. And it's the vertebral column that goes back, and then there's the leg bones from the front leg are on the back. And you can see that the matrix out there breaks a lot of times the real hard matrix and clean fractures. And so it was fractured with what the rest of the oreodont is in there. So in a couple weeks, hopefully, the rest of this will be coming home. I marked the spot, and it's luckily from here to the back of the room off the prairie, so it should be easy to carry the rest of the skeleton out. But yeah, we were late for dinner getting this around, but it was definitely worth it. The same day I was digging up, I've gotten to the point where I hesitate to take really beat up stuff, but skulls, if I can see a couple of teeth, I still take them. And this one I was glad. When you come up later, you'll have to look closer. Looks like oreodont, it's not. This is a camel. And if you look at the oreodont skull, the back of their jaw, this part of their jaw, is a perfect curve. Where on the camel, it's got an indentation like a comma. And their teeth are flatter, and they've got really big buggy eyes. And this one is pretty beat up, but it's got enough teeth, and it's still got one eye socket. And it actually has the atlas vertebrae and some neck vertebrae in the back too. So sometimes it pays to take scraps because the scrap of a camel is pretty rare. The other ranch we collect has got some really hard matrix on it, and I was digging into a place where there was an exploded skull because I could see other bone material in there. And it's difficult because when that rock is so hard, when it fractures, usually the bone blows up. It's just too delicate. And so you lose a lot of stuff, but a few pieces came out clean that had articulated hands and feet. So it was kind of neat to take the chunks where it's like, okay, the skull is gone, but it's kind of neat to see how their little toe bones go all the way down to their little hooves of a little oreodont. And then the last piece, this will be the first time I've ever brought a fossil that I didn't find. As you can see, I've taken now to doing restoration on fossils after finding enough of my own stuff. My dream is when I retire is to make my living prepping fossils and get out of the flower business that I don't like being in anymore. But anyway, I do work for some fossil dealers. And there's sometimes where, everybody's short on cash, I'll do prep for trade. And one of the guys I was doing some work on brought me a bunch of stuff from an old shell quarry in South Florida from years ago. And said, I got some stuff here, some of it's beat up. I think there are pieces that'll go back together, see what you can make out of some of this stuff. Well, I started putting things together, and one of the dream fossils I've always wished I could find is an eremophore claw. But your chances of finding one in the river are pretty much zero. And so one of the things that started going back together was an eremophore claw. So I contacted him, I said, you want to do trade for all this prep? And he said yes. So I didn't find it, but I took this from 25 pieces and made it into one piece.
That's insane.
That's an eremophore sloth.
Wow.
And it's 95% complete. I had to fill in a few cracks, but this entire tip is 100% original, and so is the socket end. It was just parts of the sheath that were shattered that I had to really reassemble. But it's just one of those, bucket list fossils.
Yeah.
I didn't find it, but it's just too cool not to share.
Well, in a way, you kind of found it. You rescued it,
I
put
brought it back to
together.
life.
Right.
I gave
That's
it a
close
second
enough.
life. Yeah. So
So is the color, did you color it, or is that the way?
that's the original color. Yeah, it was that dark. It almost looks like river, but it was from I I think he said that it was Charlotte County. He wasn't sure because he had got material from an old collector that it used to collect back in the, 30 years ago when you could go into a shell quarry and the insurance companies weren't running you out and the lawyers weren't suing you. So it could be from any of those quarries down there. And this is a color lacing material too, so who knows? But it's got a second lace now anyway.
Well, I dive at Venice a lot, so I have some local fossils that I found last week. And just some of your basic Venice stuff I'll just show, but I got one real nice high-end too. But if you dive at Venice and the visibility is okay to dive, I dove the last 7 days in a row. Visibility ranged from 10 inches to 10 feet. Actually, the best day was yesterday. But anyway, down in Venice, find the tip, lots of nice teeth. I got 10 times this, but I picked out some of the better ones, a good variety. Sand sharks, hemis, makos, I still call them makos, lemon sharks, bull sharks, stingray stuff. Also other stuff you get. I did get quite a few megs. Actually, I did good yesterday. I got 8 whole megs yesterday.
Oh, wow.
Most of these were yesterday in the megs. But anyway, these are up to a little over 3 inches, but I also got a horse tooth, a whale ear, a really nice scallop shell cast. This has a really nice definition on both sides. It's a really pretty one. And also another piece, I wasn't 100% sure what it was. This is, I think, the end of a vertebrae, kind of like the disc. It's got a nickname, they call it a cookie, but it's a round disc, kind of right on the end of the vertebrae. Sometimes they fuse together on the vertebrae.
Epiphysis disc?
What?
Is it an epiphysis disc?
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, so I'll leave this out here, and then I found one, I'll call it a high-end meg here. This is a really nice meg here. I found like all the serrations, perfect tip. It's got a little bit of minor enamel peel on it, but it's a really nice 4 1/4 inch tooth. I found that like 3 days ago, but a really high-end tooth there. So I'll leave these up here, but there's still lots of stuff to find in Venice. These were beach entry dives, so right off the beach. Just gotta spend your time. I spent like 40 hours underwater last week.
I'm going tomorrow.
So anyway.
We have special awards that were supposed to be given out at the June banquet slash pizza party, and I did not get them to the plaque engraver guy in time, so that's my fault. So we're going to give 2 of the plaques out tonight, special awards for some very special people that have spent years coming here and doing stuff for us. And let's see where I'm at. I guess we can take them out of the plastic, but we will. Oh, you want me to get out of the light? I don't want the complexion.
It's worse for me.
So, anyway, the first award we're going to give out here is, let me unwrap both of these. And on both these awards is a very nice giant armadillo scoop from Rainbow River, so it's got some nice color. And this plaque says, the Tampa Bay Fossil Club proudly acknowledges the contributions of Lawrence Cotton for his paleo research 2024. So Lawrence, come on down.
This is quite an honor.
Yes, it is. Oh, we got it. Look, I guess he's never won anything before, so he didn't know how to pan for the cameras and stuff. And, okay. And but we have another special award here before he leaves. The Tampa Bay Fossil Club proudly acknowledges the contributions of Katora Cotton for her paleo artwork. They come up here on a regular basis, do presentations for us, and the 2 of them are a team. So we're going to call them both up together. There you go.
We saw rainbow during the rain. Yeah.
Yeah, we saw rainbow. Jerry and I saw rainbow on the way in today. Big, huge one. So.
I'm sorry to say that we don't have anything to present this time, but next month and the next 2 months afterwards, we will.
Good.